Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name's Gail Stacey and I'm the Engagement Officer with @Chat. I'm a woman in my late 50s with short silvery grey hair and glasses, and today I'm wearing a black and white dress with a black shirt over the top. On behalf of @Chat, I'd really like to welcome you all to what's going to be an insightful presentation, You and Your AT in an Emergency, curated by the dynamic duo of Clare Gibellini and Andrew Fairbairn. Within these slides, you'll discover the collective wisdom and expertise of two innovative minds as they delve into the heart of the subject matter with precision, clarity, and hilarity. Please note that the contents of the presentation, excluding slides 2, 4, 5, 15, 16, 21, 29, and 30, belong exclusively to Clare Gibellini and Andrew Fairbairn. Reproduction of these slides without explicit permission is strictly prohibited, and we appreciate your request for their intellectual property and the effort and investment in crafting this valuable content. Clare and Andrew derive income from their advocacy and education work, and this presentation is a part of that body of work. So let's start with an acknowledgement of country. We wish to acknowledge the Noongar Whadjuk people, traditional custodians of this land. I acknowledge the strength of their continuing culture and offer my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We also acknowledge people with disability, past and present, those who are living full and complete lives, and those who have needs that are not yet being met. We ask that you reflect on this and work with us to bring about changes that will give all people with disability an opportunity to live an ordinary life. Before we dive into the presentation, I'd also like to acknowledge the AT Chatterbox community who have led the conversation and development of the resources to support their peers to be prepared for an emergency. Thank you for all that you do with us. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome the @Chat team who have joined us here today to learn how to be prepared for an emergency. Our team lead, Claire Walton, AT mentors, Noreen Williams and Glenn Wilson, OOT, Eleanor Kennett Smith, and of course the lovely Danica Godfrey Potter, who supports our team in so many ways, including to run this webinar today. So we've got a lot of content to get through. I'll ask that you please share any questions you have using the comments feature as you think of them, or at the end of the presentation, please raise your hand. I'll just quickly share who @Chat is before we start. @Chat's an initiative of ILA. We're a national peer-led co-designed community of AT users to share information and lived experience about AT. How we do this? We deliver national AT peer support through 2 streams, both of which have been co-designed with our community of AT users. The first is via peer-led information products that build people's confidence and capability in choosing AT solutions that will meet their individual goals and needs. And you can find short videos and articles on our AT portal. The second is through our peer support initiatives, our private Facebook group with over 1,400 active members, Chatterbox, Assistive Technology Chat, This group is open exclusively to AT users and offers a safe place to learn and share information and lived experience about using AT. And our AT Mentor service is a peer mentoring program connecting customers with AT mentors who have a Cert 4 in AT mentoring, along with lived experience of disability and using AT. Their passion is supporting their peers and discovering low to mid-cost and low-risk AT options that will help meet their NDIS goals, and they provide a letter of evidence to help purchase it. I'll now hand over to Claire and Andrew, who have kindly volunteered to share their extensive knowledge and expertise to support our community of AT users to plan and prepare for an emergency.
Hey everybody, my name's Claire. I'm a white woman with very short grey hair and very large sparkly earrings, sitting in a very big master villain style chair. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Now, gosh, where do I start my experience in this space? So I'm actually a Department of Fire and Emergency Services volunteer and also volunteer for Disaster Relief Australia. But I'm currently doing quite a bit of work in the emergency services space on all different levels, along with lots and lots of other things. I think the reason why I'm here today is because Andrew and I both sort of started on this disaster resilience journey together almost 2 years ago now, when we self-funded ourselves to travel to the United Nations Ministerial Conference in Brisbane on disaster risk, and kind of started to become a bit more aware of the gaps that were, perhaps you could better describe them as canyons in the space when it comes to supporting people with disability in disasters. And so from there, I've become very invested in keeping our community safe, and decided for myself that sometimes the best way to address gaps in the system is to become part of the system and learn from the other side. So that's kind of some of the reasons why I think it's so important. So yeah, we just and we really wanted to share what we'd learned with you guys along the way. And I'm also have completed the course for the Person-Centred Emergency Planning Facilitators course, which is specifically around people with disability. And yeah, just really committed to making sure our community stays safe. So thanks for having us. Over to Andrew.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, so my name's Andrew. I am, I don't know, I'm 53 years old. Does that make me old? I don't know. Anyway, I feel old sometimes, depending on what day of the week it is. I live in Girraween, just north of Perth. Girraween is a word that comes from the Noongar language, which means the place of flowers. And we have lots and lots of very bright Christmas trees around our place, and bottle brushes. So it's very, very bright at the moment. It's really, really lovely. So yes, my name's Andrew. I've just looked through the attendees list. There's a lot of people I already know, but for the folks that don't know me, I've worked in this industry now for about 25 years, and that's being both as an able-bodied person and also someone who identifies as having a physical disability. I'm a left below knee amputee, which I acquired 9 years ago. 9 years ago, that completely changed my life and changed the direction of my view. It changed my perceptions, and it changed my biases as to what the disability sector could be and how we can make it better. So as Claire said, we went to Brisbane, and it sort of blew our minds about what is going on. And canyons as gaps that's understated. There is so many humongously big gaps in the emergency planning process in disaster risk recovery that we need to, and that's why we feel we need to actually do this sort of work. My day job, I work for an organisation called Limbs for Life, which is the peak body for amputees in Australia. My job description there is everybody who's got a job has that last line on their job description that says other tasks as required. That is my job description completely. So it's basically whatever my boss says, I do. We as an organisation look after, we've got about, at the moment, about 17,000 people that we're looking after are on our database. We are the biggest number in the physical disability space in Australia, but we're also very much probably the quietest. A lot of our community don't identify as being disabled, and that's fine. That's not a problem at all. But disaster touches everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, your background. It does not matter at all. This work that Claire and I have decided to embark on and to work with is very important to us. Because it's about protecting ourselves and it's about protecting our families. I've also completed the P-CEP facilitator training, and I would like to say straight out of the barrel that the actual P-CEP facilitator training recently won first prize at the Disaster Risk Resilience Awards in Australia, so as the best program for building capacity of people with disabilities in the space of emergency preparedness. So that being said, strap in, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and we'll see you in about an hour and a half at the other end. So Claire, over to you. Actually, I think it's mine. I'm first, aren't I? Sorry. So what are we doing here today? Claire and I are going to cover some facts about preparedness and why it matters. We're going to look at some examples of risk, because what you may have an idea of what you think risk may be, may not be, and then what you don't think it may be, may definitely be. So we're going to explore some of those biases and perceptions. We're going to understand the warning systems and when, as people with disabilities, to act on those warnings. And Claire's got some really good oil on those, particularly about the new ones that are coming out. You're going to get some very accurate information. Between Claire and I, we've done a lot of research in building this particular presentation, so we know where the accurate information is coming from. We're going to cover getting prepared and some tools that you can use to help you do that. But the focus is going to be on AT in your preparedness plan, and then time, if we've got time at the end, Q&A. So if you want to, as Gail said, if you want to put questions in the chat as we go, if we can't cover them in this particular session, we will come back to them later on, and we'll actually go through the questions and we'll answer them as best as we can. Okay, now Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. So I just wanted to start off with some facts and figures that hopefully, don't scare you too much, but are actually the reality. The ones that I've got on the screen actually come from the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction survey that was done in 2013. Now that was recently done again, and unfortunately, the needle hasn't changed. So much of these, even though that's 10 years ago, much of these statistics are, well, pretty much all of them are still relevant today. So in terms of disability and disaster, you often see this this saying that disasters don't discriminate. Well, the fact is that they actually do, because people with disability actually face disproportionate risk when it comes to these events. So around 71% of people with a disability actually have no individual preparedness plan for disasters. They're not prepared, they haven't thought about it. About 13% of our community actually have no support should they need to evacuate. Now, around 85% of us have never actually participated in any formal disaster management or risk reduction activities like the ones that you guys are at today. And only 20% of us would actually be capable of escaping should something happen. So that's pretty scary. And those are some of the statistics that drive us today. Now, to the right of the slide, I've got 4 coloured boxes, and I'm going to take you through each of them. Now, the first one says 2 to 4 times more likely to die or be injured. Now, that comes from the statistics that people have gathered post-events, and they've worked out that people with disability face, that's the disproportionate risk that we face. So should something happen in our community, we would be 2 to 4 times more likely to be injured or to pass away. The second box says that we have a higher risk of property loss and long-term displacement from community. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You know, we often rely on you know, lots and lots of AT, again, why we're here today. But we also, because of the impact of disability on our economic outlooks, we often live in areas that are more prone to risk. So we actually do face a higher risk of losing property in those situations. The other part is around displacement. So we have to, oh, hang on 2 secs. So if everybody didn't work out, I'm actually at the Virgin Lounge at Sydney Airport. So I'm just going to have to quickly stop things from time to time. So I apologise. So in terms of displacement from community, what we find, and there was even a recent study done around the community around Hurricane Katrina, that in the US, 76% of people with disability who were displaced from Hurricane Katrina never got the chance to go back again. And this is from lots and lots of different reasons, due to you know, the trauma or the lack of financial resources, or the rebuilding is not done to support people with disability. So it's something that we do need to take into account. In the bottom left box, I've got here the right to be rescued versus the reality of triage. Now, this is really important to think about. So yes, we should, as you know, if we want to talk about human rights, which Andrew and I spend a lot of time doing, we actually do have the right to be rescued just as much as anybody else. However, I can tell you, especially as an emergency services volunteer, that the reality is we don't have enough trucks. We don't have enough ambulances. We don't have enough resources to rescue every single person that's going to need it. So that's why it's so important for us as a community to do as much as we can to be prepared before the situation happens, so that we could get ourselves out safely rather than waiting for someone to come and knock on the door, because it's quite unlikely that that will happen. A lot of emergency services don't know where we are, and they might not have the resources to get to us. Is it okay? No. Is it the reality? Yes. And that's what we need to be aware of. And the last little box here I've put is ready to be part of the solution. And I suppose that's what drives us today, both Andrew and I working as advocates at different levels of government, but also working with you guys here. So you guys can be part, by being prepared, be part of the solution as we move forward into the next, you know, well, we're actually kind of in it now, the high risk weather season. Can we move to the next slide? Thanks. And Andrew, this is you.
So what are we preparing for? Here's on the slide. There's just a list of a few things that can be prepared for in different ways. Things like heat waves, very pertinent here in Western Australia. House fires, because of whatever, electrical storms, earthquakes. Not so much a cause here, but you know, other places around Australia there are. Floods, up in the north of Western Australia, it floods almost every year. Not so much down south, but we have bushfires down here all the time. And that was very prevalent only a couple of weekends ago here in Perth, just north of where I live. So many people consider well-known emergencies, such as those fires and floods, but there's up to 28 different types of hazards and emergencies that emergency service agencies prepare for. It's important to remember that not all the things that you may be impacted by will be things that are happening in your area. And a couple of examples of that are flood. A flood can cause vital transport links to close, causing a shortness of fresh food, fuel, things like that. And then there's things like fire. A fire, the unpredictability of a fire can cause road closures. So if you need to get out and you need an accessible van for as a wheelchair user, and you need to get out, a road closure means that nobody's coming in. Nobody can come in and get you. So the fire may not be in your area particularly, but the consequence of it can be catastrophic in that space. And it's also important to have an emergency plan for incidents that may only impact you personally, such as a health emergency. What happens if you have to be put into hospital? So, and you're living on your own. So how does that work? So we'll unpack a bit more of that as we go through. So I'm now going to, for our next slide, I'm going to throw it back to Claire about the new Australian warning system.
Thanks, Andrew. So on the slide in front of us, we have 3 boxes, and each box has 3 triangles in it, and a yellow, an orange, and a red. There's one for bushfires with fire symbol in it. There's one for cyclones with a cyclone symbol in it, and there's one for extreme heat, which it's a small sun. So I don't know if everybody's aware, but we thought it would be pertinent to talk about the fact that Australia actually has a new warning system. It's a national warning system, so that it's consistent across Australia, because up until now we've had inconsistent state-based warning systems. And the warning systems are for things like bushfires, floods, storm, extreme heat, and severe weather. The system actually uses the same icons right across the country, and has been designed on feedback and research across the country, and it's actually about making sure that no matter where you are, you get consistent information. It actually relies on 3 warning levels. There's advice, which is the yellow, and that means that an incident has started, but there's no immediate danger. You should really always try and stay up to date in case the situation changes. For watch and act, which is the orange, there's a heightened level of threat and the conditions are changing, so you need to start thinking about taking action now if you want to protect yourself and your family. And that's particularly pertinent for our community, which I'll come to in the next slide. The last one, I'm not there yet, Danica. The last one is the emergency warning. So that's the red. An emergency warning is the highest level. Okay, so this is when things are really bad and you might be in danger and you need to actually take action immediately, and any delay is actually going to put your life at risk. What's different about this system is that when we move to the next slide, I'll show you what it looks like. Each warning system has a call to action underneath it, and that action, the action statements actually give individual communities clearer advice about what to do, and the calls to action can actually be used flexibly across all 3 of the warning levels depending on the hazard. So it gives the emergency services the opportunity to customise the message across, unique to the location that they're delivering it in. Now, I think WA is actually bringing this in February. From my memory from the last meeting I was at. So we will be, of course, the last ones to come online, and we will then be part of that national system right across Australia. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is what the warnings will look like. So I've got a box with a yellow symbol for a storm in the side of the triangle, which is advice. I've got a box that's got an orange background with the symbol for storm inside the triangle, and then I've got a red background with a triangle with a storm symbol inside. So this is obviously an example of a warning system for an extreme storm in your area. So you've got the word advice, and then underneath that sits customized messages for the area. So I've sort of I'll quickly read them out. One is that an incident has started. The next is that there's no immediate danger, and they're requesting that you stay up to date in case the situation changes. Under watch and act, which is the orange box, there's a heightened level of threat. Conditions are changing and you need to start taking action now to protect you and your family. And underneath the red box, emergency warning. An emergency warning is the highest level of warning, and you might be in danger and need to take action immediately. Any delay now puts your life at risk. We will send you out a link to the Australian warning system so you can have a little bit of a look at each of those warning systems and learn what that might look like. But what we wanted to sort of show to you is that, each set of warnings can actually be customised by the emergency services. So it could be something like, if you have mobility requirements, you need to leave now, and they might put that under watch and act. Right, so it means that our community is not sitting there waiting to try and get out of evacuation. They can customise it to put the warnings out for different communities in different ways. So I'd really suggest once we send you out the link, or you can just Google Australian warning system and you can go and check that out and make yourself familiar with it, because it's incredibly important. Andrew, I'll hand back over to you for the next slide.
Thank you, Claire. I would like to introduce you to getting the right information. And as you can see on this slide, there's a picture of a map which is of the bottom half of Western Australia, and there's a bunch of little yellow triangles and some black triangles and some black diamonds on there. And but this is from the ABC's emergency alert system. So what we encourage, and if you look onto the left-hand side of that picture, there's actually those yellow triangles that Claire was talking about before as a bushfire advice in the yellow. So that's as an advice, so they know it's there, you know it's there. So what we encourage you to do is make a habit of checking the official warning page in your region. And as I said, this is just a snapshot from there, from the Emergency WA. But please remember that you need to have a true source of information, and not things like Facebook, because as we all know, Facebook can filters a lot of stuff, and also there's a lot of people have a lot of opinions that may not be necessarily true. So really, really check your source of information, and that's why we do promote this one, the ABC Emergency, because that's where we get all our stuff. You may receive a text from the Emergency Alert National Warning System, and you can keep up to date by listening or watching ABC Emergency. And you can watch incidents, things unfold as they go. So if there's changes, automatically they're updated on those pages. So you'll know then that if it goes from a yellow to an orange, then you know that you're into sort of like that phase of looking at what you need to do. In an emergency, it's important to remember, don't wait for an official warning. If you feel as an individual that you need to go, then you need to go. That is up to 100% your choice. And remember what Claire said before about the resources and the way that DFES and CFA put those resources into use. They are not necessarily going to be able to get to you. So you've got to make that decision for yourself, and that's why it's so vital that you get the right information up front. It's important you don't rely solely on receiving an official message, and should always be aware of what is happening around you, as you could find yourself suddenly in danger. And we know, particularly with the fires that came through Wanneroo just a couple of weeks ago, that changed literally in 4 hours, from people not losing their houses to people losing their houses. And once you've got to act decisively. The moment if you think you're in danger, go. Don't hold it back. Don't and ah about it. If it's something that you feel strongly about, pack up, leave. It's the safest thing to do. With your emergency alert, there's a national telephone warning system, and it relies on telecommunication networks to send warning messages to mobile phones. Text messages can be sent based on the last known location of a handset at the time of an emergency. I live in the city of Wanneroo. Claire and I were together on the Wednesday when those fires hit. We were actually in the city together, and my phone was just going mad with text messages all day, all night, all the next day from being updated on that particular incident. And it includes visitors and people travelling in the area. So if you want to link into that, you can get those emergency alerts sent to your mobile device, and they can do them to iPads, anything that's basically connected to the internet. They can send them to. So you're going to have plenty of forewarning there as well. Okay, Claire, let's talk about evacuation.
Thanks. The other thing I just wanted to add to the thing about emergency alert, it works as long as the infrastructure is not impacted. Okay, so it's really important that we just be, proactive and start looking at things. I've got, even myself, I make it a habit each day of checking the emergency warnings, because it might mean I get a call out, but also I want to know what's going on in my area. But the text message thing, it's only as good as the phone towers that work. So let's not get complacent. So let's talk about evacuation. Okay, So we know that our community might need to mobilise before others. We need to, if you do need support to mobilise, you're going to need to allow time for people to reach you if you require support. And as Andrew said, we can't leave it too late, because once the road is closed, unless you have an ID belonging to the emergency services and you are actually signed on to support in that emergency, support workers and etc. who won't have that will not get through to you. So by being proactive, being prepared, you can get out much sooner and faster and calmly, rather than relying on somebody who may or may not be able to get to you. The other thing that we need to talk about, emergency services resources that might be in short supply. Okay, so evacuation centres are not necessarily going to be set up for all of the needs of all of the people. It's a very stressful, chaotic environment and time, and they may not have everything that you particularly need. And the thing is, they're not actually that comfortable, and sometimes they're not accessible. So what are we going to do about that? Well, part of being prepared is having a backup plan that you can go to instead. What we want to encourage people is to see the evacuation centres as a last resort. So here in WA, the centres are run by the Department of Communities, and they will, where possible, support people to find alternative accommodation. But that can take time, and it may not be available. As for the case of something that happened recently, there actually was no accessible accommodation available at the time. So that all the staff will actually do their best to support people, but again, it's a very stressful time. There's a lot of people moving around, and not all of the things that we might need will be available. So if we can get prepared, have a backup plan, have a place that's more comfortable, more accessible for our needs, and we can go there, it's a much better outcome for all of us. Andrew, over to you.
Well, thank you. So let's get prepping. Personal preparedness is the most important thing anyone can do to make sure that they are safe in an emergency. So being prepared helps people to respond better and to recover faster. We all need to be ready and know what to do. It's not just about what to do in an emergency situation, but we need to think about prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. And the actions that people with disability can take to increase their resilience to disaster in each of those phases. And today, Claire and I are going to be talking about the P-CEP, the Person-Centred Emergency Planning, but there's also other resources available, which we'll share with you guys at the end of the presentation. Just so you're aware, we're not going through the whole of the P-CEP workbook because of this platform is not for that, but we would be more than happy to help you work through that outside of this particular webinar. There are tools out there for you to find. Claire and I just have happened to find this one, and we find that this one works best for us because it was co-designed by people with disability for people with disability. And that was a really, really important thing for us because there's other resources out there that are people with disabilities are down the rungs a few places, which they shouldn't be. Instead of being right at the top where we prefer to have it, they would put down a little bit. So this to us is probably one of the best ones that we can use. And yeah, Claire, you want to give us a little outline of the actual workbook itself?
So like Andrew has said, we're not going to take you through the full P-CEP today because P-CEP is a process. And getting prepared is a process, and it's an ongoing process. It's not just write your plan and you're done and dusted, right? It's when you create your plan, that needs to be a living document. So, and you need to have that regularly updated. You need to re-examine your situation and your needs and your support needs, or what's changed for you. Some of the people that we work with use their NDIS review as a great time to be triggered to relook at their plan. So, if that's on an annual or 2-year basis, just making sure that everything's up to date, all the right contact details, etc., the right people. It's something that you need to commit to on a regular basis. So as we've said, this is not sorry, best laid plans. As we've said, this is a snapshot of part of P-CEP, which is what we call what is called the capability wheel. So it's a diagram that sort of operates in like a circular fashion. Around the outside are some arrows going around in a circle. Starting with number 1, which is identifying your strengths. Moving to number 2, which is knowing your level of preparedness. Number 3 is about planning for your individual needs and how you're going to manage them. And then number 4 is pretty important. It's about how you're going to communicate your plan. In the centre of the document are some icons that represent the areas of discussion that you might need to have as part of getting ready. Some of them are, I won't name them all, but social connectedness, your communication, and of course AT. But there are, I think it's 8 others. Sorry, up to 8 areas.
Yep.
What you need to know though, and it looks very big and very overwhelming and oh my God, you only need to pull out the pieces that are relevant to you. Okay, so you might only need support in 1 or 2 areas. You might need support in all of those areas. So you can work on the pieces that make sense to you.
Yep. Now,
realistically, or to build a good plan, you actually probably got to start with your strengths, which is why I love section 1. So it's all around what you have now, the kind of supports that you use right now, the needs that you have right now, and what strengths you've got. What's your unique situation? You might not realise, but you might have already taken some steps to prepare. And then once you go through this process, you can identify any of the gaps that actually increase your risk in emergencies and start working on ways to address those gaps. And as Andrew said, we are going to talk from a P-CEP point of view today because it makes the most sense to us. But what we'll do is send through to the team a bunch of other resources that we recognise are pretty relevant for people. For example, I found one not too long ago that was really basic sensory toolkit to pack with you, and if you're someone like me who has sensory needs, so we'll make sure that those resources get sent out to everyone. The next slide, please. So, how prepared are we? I really like this question, right? Yeah. Because it gets us starting, it takes away the overwhelm a little bit, and we can start to think where we're at right now. Because knowing where you're at right now is actually the first step in creating a really robust plan. It's how you're going to manage every day impacts how you're going to manage in an emergency. Oh, for heaven's sake.
Someone's heading to Adelaide. Lovely.
Yeah, there was one for the Gold Coast. I was like, yeah, I'll go there. So in this first step, think about your support needs in your day-to-day life, not going straight to the emergency. Think about where you're at right now and what you've got and what you can draw from. Now, the really cool thing about this is lots and lots of people start from step 1, and I'll give you a little bit of insider information. Some of the emergency services personnel that we work with, when they sit and think about it, are at step 1 and go, perhaps I need to work on that. So they're becoming quite big fans of P-CEP. So everybody's got to start somewhere. But if you start with what you've got right now, it can take away some of the overwhelm and fear. So I'm going to hand over now to Andrew, who's going to talk specifically about the section around assistive tech.
Cool. Thank you, Claire. If I could share a little story, it was funny because when we were, Claire and I were together in Mundaring, and there was a DFES trainer there who shall remain completely nameless, because we don't want to get them into trouble, but they identified it being like sub 1, like further down the track than 1, like had never even considered preparing for an emergency, even though they work in Department of Fire and Emergency Services. So don't be embarrassed at all about this. It is a journey, as we've shared. This whole thing is about a journey into this space. When I started this, I suppose bringing my ex-military into this, I'd thought about it a lot, but not ever actually done anything about it. Now I'm sort of up into the between 4 and 5 in my own life, which is important to me. But also, again, remembering, coming back to the capability wheel, my assistive technology needs as a lower limb amputee are very, very different to a lot of our AT users in their community. So that being said, what's the must-haves? I beg your pardon, I missed a slide, sorry. Assistive technology in your plan. Step one, part of your preparation process is thinking about your AT needs right now, not into the future, not what you used to have, but where you are sitting right now. So what assistive devices, technology, or equipment do you use daily? So as a something to think about. What supplies do I always have to have on hand? What power sources are needed to operate my equipment? And that's a really important point, because remember what Claire said about the evacuation centres. They may not be 100% suitable for someone who has high power requirements for a chair, a ventilator, hoist, any of that sort of stuff. What is required to maintain the equipment that you have and you use? And then also, who helps you? So these are just questions to think about as you start through this. You won't get the right answers first off, but the more you think about it, the more you talk about it with people, you start to build a picture of what your AT requirements are within that space of preparedness. If you have to leave, what do you need to take to maintain your life? For me, as a lower limb amputee, I have a go bag that's got socks and liners and creams and tape and all sorts of other things that I'm going to need if I have to go into an evacuation centre, but also I have a four-wheel drive and a camper trailer that's ready to go. So all I have to do is hook it up and everything else is in my truck. Grab my go bag and I'm gone. And I can be left the house within less than 10 minutes. So that's where I'm at with mine. You guys are going to start your journey. Where do you have to start your journey? So which is important. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So step two, what are the must-haves? In thinking about your AT requirements and in your plan, you have to identify the must-haves. Identify your priority assistive technology and make sure that your plan includes how you will transport critical equipment if you have to evacuate. So for an example, as we've already established, maybe a support worker can't get the van in that you need to put your wheelchair in with you in it to get you out because of road closures. That is a vital piece of equipment obviously your wheelchair is important, but that van getting you out is as much as important as your wheelchair at that time. So identifying everything that you need is in a critical space is paramount in this. So make a plan for how you will manage your equipment in an emergency. How are you going to transport it safely? How will I need to power it? What if I'm not home and I can't return home in an emergency situation, which happened in Wanneroo? And I'll talk a little bit to that in a little while. In that particular, and I'll cover that. But pre-planning is critical for people who require power supply or people to operate life-sustaining equipment. The reality is, it is unlikely you'll be able to take it all with you. So preparedness, what is the must-have to keep you alive if you have to evacuate? Cool.
I'll share a quick example if that's okay, Andrew. I'm just reflecting. So Michelle Villeneuve, who's responsible for a lot of the P-CEP work, shares this story quite a bit. So she was working with a gentleman in Queensland who was a paraplegic, and he had wheelchairs, power wheelchairs, whole kit and caboodle worth of equipment. And when they actually sat down with him and said, what's the critical piece here? Because they were really stressed, like, how are we going to get all of this person and all this equipment out in an emergency? He said, the only thing I can't live without is my alternating air mattress, because that's the thing that will stop me from getting pressure sores. That's the thing that will prevent me from going to hospital. That's the thing that will keep me healthy. So when we're talking about critical equipment, what's the thing you actually can't live without that you will at least have a chance to leave with if you're well prepared? You know, people will do their best to get everything, but you know, if you're in a hurry, you know, it's important that you can get a set the things that are absolutely vital. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So we felt it was really important to have a bit of a chat around heat waves. And one thing that I just wanted to point out is something that Andrew and I come up against a lot is when we talk to people who live in metro areas, and they say, look, we don't need to worry about bushfire. You know, we live in metro, everything's fine. 95% of our state is bushfire prone, including the Perth metro area. But we also want people to think a little bit more broadly around than just the big stuff like the fires and floods that you can see. And we particularly wanted to focus on heat waves because heat waves are the things that occur silently. But statistically, they actually impact us more than all of the other hazards combined. So we'll talk about that. So a heat wave is something that occurs when the minimum temperature and the maximum temperatures are unusually hot over a 3-day period in a specific location. That's considered considered in relation to the actual local climate and past weather at that place. It takes more than just a high daily maximum temperature to define the heat wave, though. It's also about how much it cools down overnight. So if the temperature stays high overnight, the maximum will be reached much earlier the following day, and it's going to last longer. So when those unusually high night and daytime temperatures happen, we start to see things like heat stress occurring in human populations. And that's actually a critical factor in both human health, but also in the infrastructure that we rely on every day, and the way that that functions. That can impact things like communication and phones and all those other things. There's different types of heat waves. So we've got low intensity heat waves, which we see much more frequently during summer. And most of us can cope with those kinds of heat waves. Severe heat waves, though, I would like to say less frequent, but becoming more frequent. And they're actually more likely to be more challenging for us, particularly if we've got things like thermoregulation issues or other medical issues. And then we've got extreme heat waves. So they are, again, not as common, but becoming more common. And that's when we really start to see the impact on people, because people cannot get cool and stay cool. And even that's even people who don't have disability or don't have medical conditions. So it's really important that we pay attention. Why we think it's so important? Because people don't really think about the kind of impact, and from you guys as AT users, it actually impacts your equipment, especially when your equipment is exposed to heat waves over a long period of time. It actually can impact the battery life of any equipment that you use. It can actually impact the shelf life of your medication. And it actually can also impact, as we've said, critical infrastructure such as communication and power and things like that. So heat waves are something that we really want you guys to pay attention to. So if we could go to the next slide, please, team. So part of getting heat wave ready. Again, keep an eye on, now we shared earlier Emergency WA, but in every state there's a specific emergency website that you should head to. Keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on the temperatures. Look at how things are happening overnight as well. But to get ready, if you can see that something's coming up, there are some things that you can do to minimise the impact where possible. So if we know that power is going to be impacted, what are we going to do? We can keep our devices charged as much as we possibly can, especially things like phones and those critical things that you can't live without. But do try and take them off charge once they're full, though, because long-term charging then also depletes the battery life. When it comes to your medication, try and keep it in a cool place. Now, I know some folks who use eskies or small coolers, even without ice blocks. They just have a little, you know, remember those little foam eskies you used to be able to get? Something like that in your pantry, a dark, cool place, just to keep your temperatures, you know, around the medication not fluctuating too much. And actually ask your doctor or your prescriber about the impact of heat on your medication, because sometimes, you know, if your medication is less effective, that's dangerous, but it can also, you know, change the composition of the medication and perhaps make it more dangerous to take. If you're thinking about your communication, think about how else you're going to communicate. If the power goes down or the infrastructure goes out, how else are you going to communicate and reach people? And this is when we're going to talk about community connections a little bit later, but this is where building some of those connections could be helpful. Finding low-tech ways to stay cool, you know, in advance is a really good idea. So I use the neck wraps that you can soak in water, and they have the water crystals in, because if you put it on the back of your neck there, it actually helps your whole body stay cooler. I know some people that having their feet in a bucket of cooler water can actually help with their temperature. Find low-tech ways that you can stay comfortable without relying on the power sources. I can see you with your finger, Andrew. The other thing that I want people to do as well is have conversations with their local councils, because some of the other work that I do in the background is working on the impact of heat waves, and we're starting to have conversations with local councils about where they're thinking about cooling refuges might be. So places that people can go to stay cool. Now, bearing in mind that's going to be a challenge if the power goes off, but, you know, think about where you can go to stay cool and how you're going to get there. Particularly important because a lot of us live in social housing, and a lot of that social housing doesn't have cooling air conditioners and stuff in it. So having a really good plan in advance will help you get through that. Andrew, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to make a very flippant comment about putting my left foot into a bucket of water. It's not going to make any difference to my temperature at all.
There's one in every class, I tell you, kids. So yeah, I mean, like I said, we've just focused on heat waves here, but we felt that that was really important because it's a bit of a silent killer, and, you know, over time really impacts your resilience as well, because if you get one after the other, it's really hard to recover from. But I will stop banging on about heat waves. And I
do want to add something to that, Claire, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
In high temperature and for a long time, not only impacts like health, but it also can impact your mental health.
Yes, very much so.
And how you function if you cannot sleep because your body's too hot, the whole thing's too hot. It just wears you down. So heat is one thing that a lot of people don't think about, and I was very flippant about the foot in the bucket of water. But as an amputee and losing part of my body temperature is actually higher.
Yep.
So I'm a lot more susceptible now to heat than I was 9 years ago, because I've got nowhere to sweat.
Exactly.
And so it's something that you go, oh, brain, you know, like light bulb moment, boom. I'd never thought about it before, but the heat can affect a lot of people in a lot of different ways. It's something really, really, really important to keep an eye on. So thank you for bringing that to attention, and Claire.
Even for me, I'm a person, I have some physical disability stuff, but my biggest impact is I'm autistic. And so if I can't sleep, my sensory capacity is very, very much reduced. That's why I look like this today. So so, you know, for all of us, whether you've got a disability or not, actually, but for all of us, really important to take that on board. So I'm going to pass over to Gail now, who's going to share some of the things that some other chatters have been doing.
Thanks, Gail.
Oh, thank you. Wow, just it's spinning with all of that. And look, I'm not going to share what's in these, but I just wanted to share these two resources that the Chatterbox community helped develop. First is emergency planning. Don't forget the AT, which shared how the AT community prepared for the challenges of COVID alongside natural disasters. Yeah, and there's just some amazing advice and tips from our peers in that article, and a lot of it mirrors what Claire and Andrew have been sharing today. And I think just straight up, one of the things that got me thinking about was one of the comments from a lady about the support staff knowing your plan and knowing your backup plan. So if you have a hoist that normally operates using power and you have a key, that's awesome. But does everyone know where that key is? Not always. And the most recent resource, which is a lovely article by Pat Smith, Ready or Not, which is a personal Be Prepared story. And she shares her journey of how her community of at-chatters motivated her to develop an emergency plan so that she felt less vulnerable. And yeah, I can't thank Pat enough and the community for their willingness to share, their lived experience of planning for an emergency, and yeah, look where it's led us to today. So that's wonderful. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you,
No,
Gail.
I'm going to throw Mr. Fairbairn under the bus for the next one.
So, packing an emergency kit. This slide sort of is very self-explanatory. Pack to survive and to recover. There's many online tools that you can use to decide what to pack for an emergency kit. Red Cross have one called Ready Plan, and there's also an app called Get Prepared. And if you're really old school like me, and you could always watch Doomsday Preppers, because you can really get some good stuff out of that as well. Bigger bonker underneath. Organisation called Ember have also created a list for people with sensory needs, and which Claire alluded to earlier. And we'll share those links to those after this. It's important to take items that support you not only surviving the emergency, but recovering from it as well. We don't like to think about worst case scenario, but best prepared if you are significantly impacted in some way. So for an example, in that case, for me as a prosthetic user, my prosthetics are all consumable. So if I don't take 1 or 2 liners in my go bag, then I don't have liners. So I then have to replace those liners somehow. Otherwise, I can't use my leg. So the impact of not putting together a solid emergency kit for me and having those liners there, it could be quite, it would be very disabling for me of being able to walk. Of course, you think about a lot of survival items in your kit: food, water, a torch, batteries, radios, protective clothes. There's a whole bunch. There's a whole list. But we're also probably thinking about packing spare clothes. Remember, emergencies can last for days, and you might have to be in an emergency shelter or in emergency accommodation for anything up to a week or longer. So if you don't, so it's a good idea to think about packing some extra clothes. Clean undies, clean t-shirts, clean pairs of shorts, all that sort of stuff as well. So pack for worst case scenario, that you're not going to come home. That's the worst case scenario. So take as much stuff as that you think you'll need, and then probably pack a little bit more because you probably need that as well. Make sure you have enough sanitary items: soap, toothbrush, toothpaste, hairbrush, all that sort of stuff as well. Because you may not be able to get to a shop to buy more if you need it, because the shops all might be cut off from where you live. You may also consider any special requirements for people in your household have. Baby formula, diapers, wipes, things like that, incontinence pads, spare glasses, walking aids, a walking stick, crutches, things like that. A decent first aid kit is a real lifesaver. I have one of those. I have one in my campers, one in my truck, because that's, for me, I know it's there if I need it. One thing that a lot of people seem to forget about, and it always comes up when we talk about this, is prescription medication. And it's something to think about. Who holds your scripts? Do you have them at home? Do you have them in the chemist? Do you have to get them from the doctor? So something to think about is where your script is, and will you be able to access your prescription medication in the face of not being able to be at home?
Andrew, can I just share an example?
Oh.
Yeah, so people think, oh, no, I'll just be able to get it. So I actually have ADHD, and I can only get my prescription from a psychiatrist. And I can only take my prescription to one chemist, and it has to stay there. So I need to think about, what am I going to do if the chemist is closed, impacted by the disaster, or the chemist, like, I just can't get it. So I've had to think about getting a letter from my psychiatrist, and we've had conversations about plans to get me more prescription if I get removed and I can no longer access that prescription. So I know it's a lot to think about, but a lot of us take that kind of medication.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why that preparedness planning is so important, because you are focusing on each aspect of your life and then creating a plan to cover the case of emergency. Thinking about communication, devices. When you pack an emergency kit, do you pack an extra Apple charger? Do you pack a USB-C charger for your Samsung devices? Have you got enough devices to charge all your for your AAC device, which would be on a different charging device as well? So having spares of those is always a really good idea as well. There's some really, really good kit out there at the moment with multiple charges off one USB. So different devices can be charged, the USB-C, the Thunder port, all those sort of things. So looking around for one of those is perhaps a good idea to put that in your go bag and your emergency kit as well. Spare batteries, if you need them, for radios, things like that. Put those in. But when you actually build a bag or build an emergency kit, you have to make sure that you test the batteries when we actually put them in there as well. Because the last thing you want to do, go out into it, be subjected to an emergency, and I've got my kit, I'm ready to rock and roll. Crap, all my batteries are flat. So something to think about as you go. But you can set up the way that we encourage people to do it. If they've got fire alarms in their houses that they change the batteries in every year, change the batteries in your go bag as well. So everything gets thrown out, recycled, and then you can bring in the new stuff, and so everything's new again for the next year. What else we got? Stuff like EU documents, wills, legal insurance documents, driver's licenses, passports, all that sort of thing, all birth certificates, things that you would not necessarily think of as a day-to-day thing, but in an emergency, that's the sort of stuff you should have copies of. In my planning, I thought about this, and I thought the best way for me to do this is I have certified copies of all my documents in a folder, in a lockbox underneath the seat of my truck. So they can be accessed. They're there for when I leave. And if I change an insurance company or change my will or change anything to do with my documents, all I do is take the old one out, put the new one in as a certified copy. And in the case of an emergency, a certified copy will be like having a real one, because people do lose things in those situations. Fireproof USB is another really good one. I saw one of those the other day, which is really cool. And I think it was about 32 gigs, so it holds a lot of information, and you can download all your important documents and photos and stuff like that onto that, and you can take that with you. So there's lots of things out there to explore of how you can work with that for your own use and your own determination. Cash, money is an important thing. We tend to work with credit cards and bank transfers and things like that. And if telecommunications is down, we've got no access to money at all, because there's no that everything's run on the phone lines on the internet. So if the internet's out, there's no power, it's not going to work. If you've got NBN in your house, you cannot transfer money when the NBN's down. So having a stockpile of cash in your emergency kit is probably not a bad way to go either. Coins, if you need to, for laundromats and stuff like that. For phone, or you don't actually have to use coins for phones anymore, because Telstra, it's all free now. But anyway, that's cool. But cash to buy food, cash to buy fuel if you need, depending on how far you need to get away. All those sort of things. So thinking about a little stash of cash is a really good idea. And what else we got? Look, comfort things. What comforts you, and what's going to make the time away easier? We all have our little things. For me, I know it's a bit lame, but if I can, as long as I can take one of my saxophones out of the house with me and bring it with me, I'm good. I would hate to lose my collection of saxophones, but that's, for me, that's my comfort, and I know that I could find somewhere to play, which would make me keep me sane. Really, it would be things for your like photos, jewelry, things like that. Anything that you couldn't stand to lose, I suppose, goes into that sort of emergency kit. But remember, again, if you're going to an evacuation centre or an evacuation place, you're not going to have a lot of room. So pretty much whatever you take with you is what you're going to carry. And so you may not have enough room. If you've got children, it's important to remember them and what what they would like to bring with them in the way of that comfort. It could be their favourite toy, things like that, but also to include them in that packing process, in that emergency kit process. So what's important to them, what's going to make them feel at ease if you do have to get up and get out as well. Not everything, you're not going to have everything that we've mentioned in your kit, but it's a good idea on the top of your kit. And I saw one, I can't remember where it was, but I'll find it again as a resource that actually has a clear. It's a red bag similar to the one on the picture as the medical kit on the slide, but it has an insert plastic sleeve that you can put a piece of paper in it with everything that's written, and write down everything that's inside the bag. So you might get 3 or 4 of those bags and have different one each for you, partner, kids, that sort of stuff, dogs, animals, if you're taking them out as well. So yeah, thinking about that. I'm
really conscious that I've just seen the time and we've been chatting for a really long time. I'm going,
But last thing with the emergency kit, pack it, but don't forget to take it.
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
Forget to pick it up and take it.
Go, Claire. Just on the bottom of that, items to care for pets, it's really important that you're aware that as a general rule, animals that are not assistance animals are not allowed in evacuation centres.
Yes. Animals that are not assistance animals won't be allowed inside the emergency vac centres. The City of Wanneroo have done a really, really good job in setting up an animal shelter where people can transport their animals to in the case of an emergency. So it's basically like a farm, and it's fully fenced off.
Yeah, and why we wanted to mention that is because not a lot of people are aware of that, and not all of us, like for us, a lot of us, our animals are actually very, very important and integral to our well-being. My dog is almost like an assistance dog for me, but he's not an accredited assistance dog, so I wouldn't be able to take him into the shelter. So it's important, if we have really good plans to go somewhere else, we should be okay. So I'm just really conscious of the time because I want to make sure that you guys get the chance to have your questions asked. So if we could just quickly go to the next slide, and I'll just quickly touch on the subject matter. So it's talking about other considerations in an emergency. We have to think longer term. Okay, so we need to have a plan not just to survive, but what happens next? How do we protect the life that we actually value? So we might want to think about what are the long-term accommodation options going to be for us? How are we going to manage longer-term access to services like medical support or our support workers, etc.? What are the financial implications are going to be? You know, going through an emergency is actually quite expensive. So, you know, even if you've got great insurance, you might still have shortfalls. What's the plan around that? How are we going to replace some of that essential AT that wasn't critical, so we had to leave it behind for the stuff that was? But what's going to happen when we do need to start getting that back in? We all know how long it takes to get AC in a non-emergency. Don't even get me started on the recovery process. But you need to think about those things, and you need to think about preparing for loss, not just financial, but things like property, things like animals if you couldn't get them out, you know, all of those sorts of things, those irreplaceable items. So I won't belabor that point too much, but part of your thinking needs to be about and then, okay? So if we could move to the next slide. I'm sorry about the noisy people behind me. I did try to find a quiet corner. The other thing that we wanted to talk about was the actual importance of being really well connected. So there's that common misconception that fire and emergency services are going to come and knock on your door and get you out. That's not actually the case. What we know is that there's not enough resources, and most of the time it's people in our community that are going to be best placed to support us. They're close by, you know, for the most part humans are good and they want to help. Okay, so it is important to try and get connected. So try and think about ways to build your community networks. So you might think about setting up a phone tree for your street, or connecting with a local bushfire preparedness group, or even I know a couple of people who have just a WhatsApp group for their street, so that, you know, and that actually helps when they're on holidays just as much as an emergency. So think about how you can get connected. The statistics tell us that about 80% of the people that have gone through an emergency and recovered well on the other side usually do that with just the help of friends and family. Because when we think about it, it's usually those folk who will be the ones to provide most of the general practical support and emotional support that we need before and after. They'll be the ones who come and, you know, help out cleaning up, childminding, school runs, all those sorts of things. So think about how you can improve your community connections. Andrew, did you want to quickly run through the next slide? Just quickly.
So just a couple of tips on how to get connected for in your communities. Start small, friends, family, and neighbours. Get to know who your neighbours are. Join community groups, volunteer groups, participate in community events. So be seen in your community. So you're not invisible. Talk to your council for ways to get involved. I think every local government in Western Australia, all of them have, we know that they have to do the disability access and inclusion plans. A great way for the local government to get to know you is through those disability access and inclusion reference groups and planning groups. So you can volunteer for that. And please don't rely on one person. So you build a network to have multiple people to lean on if needs be. And remember, connection works both ways. So you can connect with your community, but your community then can connect with you also. Some people need more help than others. So how can you help someone who is in more need than you? So to think about that as well. So that then also helps to create that connectedness. Thanks, Claire. Oh, I've got this one. Preparing to plan. Okay. Completely blow it the fact it's never too late. It is never ever too late to start preparing for a plan. Okay, talk about it with other people. Start conversations with people who've already done this work and been down and starting on that path, and get them to start thinking about the plans of their own. It can, in some ways, be a difficult conversation to start, but once you start it, it becomes easier. because people are all then thinking about, oh, what if, and we've just started summer here in Perth, and we've already seen 2 massive bushfires, and people have lost their houses. We haven't even started summer yet, so it's going to get worse. So start those conversations with your friends, with your family, at work, wherever, with your peers. Talk to people who've already worked this. You know, I live in the metro area, but across the street from me, there's 7 gum trees that are 145 feet tall that are just waiting to go up because they, you know, it can happen. And we know from research, we know that a fire ember can fly for 5 kilometres, 10 kilometres. Thank you. 10 Ks. So where you live, do a big circle of 10 Ks around. So if there's a bushfire somewhere in there, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, and just to reiterate the thing with Wanneroo, there was a couple of my friends lost their houses in that, and it was devastating for them, but nobody was hurt, and that was the best part. That they managed to, the plans that some of the people had were enacted, and they managed to get them out. So it was a litmus test. It was a test to see whether their plans worked, and they did. And there was a couple of folks from our community who were evacuated to the Currumbine evacuation centre, and they've reported back over the last couple of days that that wasn't as bad as what they thought it was going to be, but they would love the opportunity to have gone in there first to have a look at it, which is something else that we're working on at the moment as well. So I can pretty much guarantee you that on that Wednesday afternoon, there was nobody was thinking about losing their house on Thursday night as that fire ripped through Wanneroo. And from what I heard yesterday, some of it is still smouldering. So it's this, you know, I just implore to really, really take this on board and have a serious look at your own plans and how they're going to work. It sounds really, really hard and really, really like depressing, but in the long run, it's really, really important. Really important. Okay, Claire, over to you.
Great. So this is where my nerd comes out. Doctor Who fans unite. So communication, right? There is no point in doing any of this stuff. So for those of you who are who are vision impaired, I've actually got a picture of a Dalek on the screen with the words communicate, communicate, communicate. I thought I was extremely funny. However, there is no point to doing any of this unless you tell somebody about it, right? There's no point in the plan living in your drawer. There's no point in the plan living in your head. It's only going to be effective if you tell someone about it. Writing it down is just not enough. You've got to talk about it. You've got to make time to discuss it. You've got to make time to share it. Talk to people about the gaps that you've got in your plan. What are you going to need to help you get to the next level? It's going to help you, but it'll also get other people thinking about it and starting to think about their own journey and help you advocate for better supports with your local government. Why we say local government is because I don't know about the rest of Australia, but in WA, local government actually manage quite a lot of the emergency services in their area. So if you can get talking to them, it's a really good way to build a relationship. So think about who you're going to tell. Thinking about what's the most important thing in your plan that you need to communicate. And remember, it's a living document. You need to look at it regularly. You know, every time you do an NDIS review, revisit your plan and check the contents of your emergency kit because they're for expiration. Right? 3 things, do them all at once because we haven't got enough to do. But also make those changes. Communicate them with your NDIS, LAC and planner. And I know that some questions are coming up around the NDIS. I have reached out through my connections to the Deputy CEO, and we are having these conversations about some of your queries. So we'll come back to that when we've got an answer. But please communicate your plan. None of it means anything unless you tell somebody about it. Great. Let's open up for questions. But the last slide that we'll share with you now, you can have a look at P-CEP and where you can find out more information about it. I'm sure Danica's going to put the link in the chat right now. Or if you want to talk to me and Andrew a little bit more, we've actually starting up our own group of people to talk about facilitating, and to talk about P-CEP. So you can find us, or you can find us on LinkedIn. So yeah, check us out. Please reach out if you've got any questions. I'm actually happy to keep going past the meeting time because I really want to answer people's questions. I don't know about everyone else, but I got nothing to do. I'm stuck for the next few hours. So but let's open it up now to some questions.
So we have some questions in the Q&A section. I don't know, would you like me to just...
I can't see that, so yeah, if you can just...
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
I'll read them out. So we've got, so the first one that came through was from Noreen. She said, Claire mentioned that emergency services don't know where we, people with disability, are. Is there a way people with disability can register their location with their local emergency services?
Yeah, so from my understanding, there's two parts to that question. Generally, there's not been any registers set up. It's more about having good conversations and relationships and being prepared in advance. I don't have an answer for every local government, but from my understanding is not as a general rule. Part of that is because there's some research that's actually been found that it actually puts us at higher risk, okay, to be on these kinds of registers. Because, you know, people move, they forget to update, you know, and there's no, at the moment, central mechanism for people to get, to be identified. And again, it actually builds complacency in people because if they think that they're on a register, they sit back and wait for people to come to them. So that's one of the risks that was identified. So it's much better to be prepared in advance.
And we had two questions from Zaya. She said, do we have a universal warning system? And I guess I'll let you answer that one first.
So we don't have a universal across the globe, but we do, and as of February, I believe, we'll all be part of the National Australian Warning System. So, yeah.
And then the other one was, what are the reasons that 85% of people with disability are not taking part in disaster management / risk reduction activities?
Yeah, great question. Yeah. So the reason that we're not involved is because whilst we all live in our disability bubble, the reality is that we're not something necessarily that the emergency services are connected to or involved with. What I've discovered over time, and it's really hard to say this, but they see us as a problem to be solved, which means they don't see us as a solution or a very useful part of their toolkit. And so some of the work that Andrew and I have been having, and we encourage you guys to do the same, is to say, hey, we live in a world that is not designed for us. We navigate systems and services and, you know, infrastructure every day that doesn't meet our needs. So we actually already know how to work agile and flexibly, the kind of same way you need to do in an emergency. So I know, me and my revolutionary ideas, right? But what we're actually doing is actually starting to have those conversations on a higher level, and that language is changing a little bit. But the reality is that we're just not thought about in a lot of those traditional sorts of services. You know, part of it's the resourcing and that reality of triage kind of stuff, and part of it is awareness. And so the more people we get talking about this, the more we get them thinking about this. So, but that's the identified reason why. It actually ties to underrepresentation of people with disability in most spaces. We're just not in leadership positions. So we're working to change that. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah. And then one last one was, it says, have we seen that in action, e.g. the customizations for mobility limitations?
Yeah, well, I saw that question just pop up quickly.
Yeah.
So I did go back to the emergency warning the Australian Warning System website. So I just gave you a very brief snapshot because I didn't want to overload the slides. But for example, I have seen some customized ones. So under some of the watch and act things, you might see move to higher ground, moving away from creeks and rivers and coast in floods. You might see stay away from damaged buildings and other hazards if there was an earthquake. You might see prepare for isolation. You might see things like prepare to take shelter. Some of the things under emergency, under advice, you might see things like monitor the conditions or avoid the smoke. So remember, Andrew talked about it might not necessarily be something directly in your area, but smoke travels, and if you have breathing issues, so those are some of the different ways it's been to be customised. So yes, I have seen it.
That was all the questions we had in the Q&A section. And there hasn't been anything else in the chat other than really lovely comments about this being one of the best and most important webinars of 2023. So
thank you very much.
Nice. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so unless there's any more questions, I don't think so. Gail, would you like to finish us off?
Yeah.
Just please do reach out, guys, because we have these conversations just about every day, and it's really important. The girls of the team will share the contacts for Andrew and I. You can find us on LinkedIn. Andrew, I just realised I answered all of the questions without giving you the chance to speak, and that's because my ADHD medication is worn off.
Mate, for everybody who's still here, Claire and I do this regularly, so I am used to that. And look, I far be it from me to stop a roll, right? I mean, but no, and look, Claire and I come to this from very, very different perspectives as well. So it's important to remember from the physical disability stance that there is a lot of physical stuff, a lot of things we have to remember to pick up and buy and stuff. And there's a question in the chat that I just answered about the consumable part of my plan. I have NDIS funding, and I go through all the questions in the self-managed. I'm self-managing my plan. I go through all the questions as a self-management guide, and I'll go, okay, socks, liners, creams, all that sort of stuff is all consumable, and that part of my ongoing requirements. So I actually don't have a problem buying one or two more of those particular things to put in my go bag. I wouldn't need to buy them if I wasn't an amputee. So sometimes you've got to go, okay, yes, I've got it and I will need it in the case of an emergency, but we do have to be prepared for that emergency. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 that I know I'm not going to be able to get it in the face of an emergency. So I do have to stockpile it a little bit prior to. So that's part of that planning process. I don't need to buy 20 of them. One will do. I don't need to buy 10 socks. 2 will do. I don't need to buy 20 rolls of tape if I need to tape up my leg. 1 will do. Do you know what I mean? So it's being reasonable, but the stuff is necessary. So don't be afraid of asking that question. Is this something that I will need when I get in the situation where I have to evacuate? What is the priority? What is the priority to save you?
Yeah. Andrew, you've just reminded me. So for those who are still with us, thanks. I've actually raised the question with the agency. What if I need to purchase something that I might only need in an emergency? So I might have the proper bed now, but if I was to go to an evacuation centre, that alternating ear mattress might be something that I need. So I've actually raised that question directly with the Deputy CEO, and as soon as I have some formal advice, I will come back to you. And we've also asked them through the Independent Advisory Council to start thinking about some more formal advice around emergencies through the wider NDIS. So watch this space. We'll give the information to the team as soon as we've got it. Zia, please reach out if you're wanting to talk about Pakistan, because that's some work that I'm doing in another hat, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. Over to you, Gail. I'm shutting up.
Look, I just thank you both Claire and Andrew. That's just amazing. My head's spinning, and as I'm sure everyone else is, with right, where am I, and how do I either start my plan or make it better? And like you say, communicate it. And who do I communicate it with? Yeah, so thank you, because every time you get up in the morning, it seems these days there's a major weather event somewhere in Australia. And like you say, Claire, even if it is somewhere else, it can impact you where you are. And I think COVID was a good example of that, where you really had to consider, you know, where you were getting your medications from, and will you still be able to get it. And with the rail that broke down across Australia because of the weather, that stopped a lot of things coming over here. So yeah, it really does get you thinking. Yeah, I'd like to thank the lovely Karen and Linda for interpreting for us today. So much to get through. Really appreciate it. Yes, so many takeaways. But to wrap up, if you could please take the time to give us some feedback, either using the QR code or the link that the lovely Danica's put in the chat. We'd really like your feedback. We'd like to continue the conversation with the AT community, including develop more resources. So if you'd like to see a resource around low cost AT to help an emergency, or just with heat or anything, just reach out to us, and yeah, or let us know in the feedback form. That would be wonderful. But yeah, thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Claire and Andrew.
And thank you, Gail, for being the face of that chat.
Oh, lovely to see everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Great to hear you all, see you all. Speak soon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.